Houston, Texas, January 15th, 2012. It was a quiet Sunday night in a nice neighborhood. A young woman named Jalara Bagherzadeh was driving home after spending time with friends. She was on the phone with her boyfriend, chatting, relaxed. But as she pulled up near her parents' townhome, another car drove up beside hers. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. The bullet went through her window and hit her in the head while she was still on the phone. Her car rolled forward and crashed. Jalara died on the spot, and the shooter got away without leaving a trace. The killing shocked everyone. Jalara was a smart scientist and a strong voice for women's rights. She had left behind strict traditions and stood up for freedom, especially for women like herself. Her death didn't make sense to anyone, and sadly, it wasn't the end. 10 months later, another person was murdered. This time, it was Cody Beavers, a 28-year-old husband and a deeply faithful Christian. He had married Nesreen Ersan, Galara's close friend. Nesreen came home to find her husband shot to death in their apartment. Deep down, she already knew who had done it, her own father. Ali Ersan was a father who believed his daughter had brought shame to their family by leaving Islam, marrying a Christian, and choosing her own path. He didn't see her choices as freedom. He saw them as betrayal. And he blamed not just her, but the people who had helped her, especially Galara and Cody. This wasn't a sudden outburst. It was planned. Over months, Ali watched, followed, and with help from some of his own family members, he set out to restore honor the only way he knew, through violence. This is the real story of Jalara Bagherzadeh and Cody Beavers. Two people who stood by their values and paid the ultimate price. Welcome to the crime series. Before we begin, do us a quick favor. Drop your location and the time you're watching this in the comments. We want to know where you're tuning in from, because these stories matter everywhere. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. In a quiet corner of southwest Houston, the Bagherzadeh family built a new life. One rooted in community, education, and hope. They had come from Iran in search of something their homeland could no longer guarantee. Freedom. Not just economic or political freedom, but something more personal, especially for their daughter, Jalara. Even from a young age, she had shown remarkable intelligence, curiosity, and a strong will. Her parents believed that in America, Jalara could chase her dreams without fear, without limits. They arrived in Houston in 2007 and quickly became part of the local Iranian American community. But Jalara stood apart, not because she rejected her culture, but because she questioned the parts of it that, in her eyes, held women back. She wasn't rebellious for the sake of being different. She simply believed that every woman had the right to think, speak, and live freely. That belief would shape everything she did. Jalara enrolled at the MD Anderson Cancer Center, one of the most respected research institutions in the country. There, she studied molecular genetics, focusing on the mechanisms behind cancer development. Her academic work was praised by professors and colleagues alike. But Jalara was more than just a scientist. She was a powerful voice for change. Outside the lab, Jalara became deeply involved in social activism. She was passionate about human rights, particularly women's rights in the Iranian diaspora and beyond. She joined protests, gave interviews, and participated in satellite television programs aimed at Persian-speaking audiences around the world. These broadcasts, often critical of the Iranian regime and religious oppression, were banned in Iran, but they were watched secretly by many. She used every platform she had to speak out. Her criticisms weren't just political, they were deeply personal. She knew what it felt like to grow up under rules that placed limits on women's education, dress, and behavior. In America, she found her voice, and she used it boldly. Friends described her as fiercely intelligent, energetic, and unapologetically outspoken. She wasn't afraid of confrontation when it came to her values. Her public stances, however, did not come without risk. Some conservative members of Houston's Iranian American community saw her views as too radical. She was criticized, sometimes harshly, for speaking out against traditional norms. But Jalara never backed down. She believed that silence in the face of injustice was its own kind of oppression. In 2011, Galara made a personal decision that shocked many in her community. She converted to Christianity. To her, this wasn't just about faith. It was about freedom. It was a symbolic break from the expectations placed upon her as a woman from a Muslim background. She embraced her new faith publicly, even adopting Christian symbols and attending church regularly. Some saw it as an act of defiance. But to Galara, it was a declaration: I will live my life on my terms. The move only deepened the divide between Galara and the conservative voices around her. While she received support from Christian groups and progressive activists, others accused her of turning her back on her heritage. Rumors circulated. Her image appeared on online forums and in community gossip. She was labeled a troublemaker by some, but none of it made her stop. If anything, it strengthened her resolve. At the time, Galara also began mentoring younger women, especially those from strict religious homes, encouraging them to seek independence and pursue education. One of those women was Nesreen Ersan, a fellow student who had grown up under the tight control of her father, Ali Mahmoud Awad Ersan, a conservative Jordanian immigrant. Galara and Nesreen became close. She gave Nesreen what she had once needed herself: permission to question, to choose, to live. What Galara may not have fully realized was just how dangerous that friendship would become. It was sometime in 2011, during her studies at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, that Galara Bagherzadeh met a young woman named Nesreen Ersan. Like Galara, Nesreen came from a Middle Eastern background. But while Galara was Iranian and outspoken, Nesreen was Jordanian American and reserved. Always watching her surroundings, always choosing her words carefully. From the outside, they seemed very different. But something clicked between them. Galara quickly became more than just a friend. She became a mentor. She encouraged Nesreen to open up, to question the strict rules she'd grown up with, and to imagine a different kind of life. To Galara, personal freedom, especially for women, was something worth fighting for. And for Nesreen, that fight was very personal. Nesreen had grown up under the rule of her father, Ali Mahmoud Awad Ersan, a naturalized U.S. citizen originally from Jordan. He ran his household like a fortress. Prosecutors would later describe it as a prison of fear. Inside that home, Ali was the law. His children weren't allowed to go out freely, have friends outside their religious circle, or make choices without his approval. They were closely watched, emotionally manipulated, and sometimes physically punished. Romantic relationships were forbidden, and the idea of converting to another faith, especially Christianity, was considered an unforgivable betrayal. Galara didn't fully grasp the extent of Ali Ersan's control at first. She knew Nesreen was scared of him, but she may have underestimated how far Ali was willing to go to enforce his beliefs. Still, Galara offered something that Nesreen had never experienced before: a safe space to think, talk, and dream. The two women bonded quickly, over long conversations, shared frustrations, and a growing hope that life could be different. Through Galara's support and their expanding circle of friends, Nesreen eventually met Cody Beavers, a kind, soft-spoken Christian man who worked in the same community. Cody was 28 years old and part of a tight-knit family. He had an identical twin brother named Corey Beavers, who would later become an important figure in this case. Cody stood out for his steady character: calm, hardworking, deeply religious, and always respectful. He had no interest in power or control. He simply wanted to love and be loved. To Nesreen, Cody was everything her world had never given her. He offered safety, kindness, and the freedom to be herself without fear. Their connection was instant, but their love was dangerous. Nesreen confided in Cody about her life at home. She told him about the emotional abuse, the religious pressure, and her father's threats. Cody took it seriously. He didn't dismiss her fear. In fact, he began to take precautions, installing a firearm in their apartment for protection, watching over Nesreen closely, and avoiding contact with anyone tied to her family. The two of them knew they couldn't be open about their relationship. Ali Ersan had already made it clear: Any act of independence was an act of war. Still, Nasreen made the bold choice to leave her father's home. She stayed in hiding with friends for weeks, moved carefully, and even began using a new phone and email. Eventually, she and Cody were married in a private civil ceremony in July 2012, away from her family's knowledge. It was a small, quiet wedding, but to them, it meant everything. Nasreen also converted to Christianity following her own path of faith. Her conversion, just like Galara's the year before, wasn't just religious, it was symbolic. It meant choosing her own life, choosing love, choosing freedom. But to Ali Ersan, it meant war. He saw his daughter's conversion and marriage as a disgrace. And worse, he believed Galara was the one who had corrupted her. In Ali's eyes, Galara wasn't just a friend, she was the reason his daughter had broken away. His hatred grew deeper, and soon it turned into something far more dangerous. Cody Beavers lived a life marked by quiet strength and deep conviction. He was not the kind of man who sought attention or drama. Instead, those who knew him described a steady presence, loyal, grounded in faith, and quietly courageous. His devotion to Nasreen, his wife, was unshakable. Even as her father's threats grew louder and more dangerous, Cody never pressured her to leave or hide. He understood the risks, but believed that love and justice would eventually win. In his eyes, this was America, a place where people could choose who they loved, what they believed, and how they lived. But that very belief placed him directly in the path of a man who rejected those values entirely. The web connecting Cody, Nasreen, Galara Bagherzadeh, and the Ersan family was not immediately obvious to outsiders. On the surface, they seemed like ordinary young adults, students, professionals, spouses. But beneath that image lay something much darker. A household ruled by fear, a patriarch obsessed with control, and a dangerous ideology disguised as faith. For Nasreen, life at home had long been difficult. Her father, Ali Mawud Awad Ersan, was a strict, domineering man. He ran his household like a private religious court. Friends were forbidden. Dating was out of the question. And religion wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. Nasreen understood the danger. After moving out, she changed her phone, used a different name at times, and avoided contact with her family. She even sought legal protection, securing a protective order against her father. The order included detailed claims of verbal abuse, physical punishment, and explicit threats. But Nasreen knew that a restraining order was only a piece of paper, and that her father had never been one to fear American law. In his mind, his authority came from God, not the courts, and in his world, restoring honor to his family would require blood. Before we continue, if you're finding this story important or eye-opening, take a moment to support this channel. Hit the like button to help more people see it, and subscribe if you want to hear more real cases that are often overlooked. These stories matter, not just because of the crimes, but because of the silence they break. By early 2012, Ali Ersan had already begun putting his deadly plan into motion. But this wasn't the first time he had used violence to deal with what he perceived as a challenge to his authority. In fact, more than a decade earlier, there had been another killing, one that, at the time, had slipped through the legal system almost unnoticed. In 1999, Nasreen Ersan, then a teenager, had secretly married a man named Amjad Alidam, a young Muslim of Palestinian descent. Their relationship had been hidden from Ali, as Nasreen feared his reaction. When Ali eventually discovered the marriage, he was furious. Her father viewed her marriage as a direct betrayal of his authority, similar to how he would later react to her relationship with Cody Beavers. Not long after the discovery, Ali confronted Amjad Alidam. The meeting ended with Amjad being shot and killed by Ali, who immediately claimed self-defense. According to the account Ali gave to law enforcement, Amjad had become aggressive and had pulled a weapon, prompting Ali to shoot in order to protect himself. No criminal charges were filed at the time. Authorities accepted his explanation, and the case was closed. But the details didn't sit well with everyone. Now history was repeating itself. Tensions between Ali Ersan and his daughter Nasreen had reached a boiling point. Her marriage to Cody Beavers, the devout Christian man, had marked what Ali viewed as the ultimate betrayal. Nasreen had already left Islam, and now she had solidified her break from the family by marrying outside the faith, without his consent, and against his explicit commands. Ali did not see this as merely defiance. In his mind, it was apostasy, a crime that he believed warranted retribution. But Nasreen was not the only one in his sights. From Ali's point of view, Galara represented everything that had gone wrong. She had left behind the rigid expectations of traditional culture. She spoke openly, converted to Christianity, and encouraged Nasreen to do the same. In his mind, she was the instigator, the outsider who had poisoned his daughter's mind. Her activism, education, and independence made her more than a threat. She became the embodiment of what he loathed most. And worse, she was visible. She appeared on satellite television broadcasts. She participated in protests. She spoke out against oppression in Iran. Galara wasn't hiding, she was leading. This belief in Galara's role as an instigator only deepened Ali's rage. And it wasn't confined to private thoughts. He voiced his suspicions and fury regularly. He spread rumors in the community, handed out flyers with defamatory messages, and told others that he had been betrayed. His obsession wasn't just personal, it became methodical. As time passed, Ali's fixation on Galara deepened. Hence, within his household, Ali enlisted others to assist in tracking Nasreen and those close to her. One of his daughters, Nadia, worked alongside him. She used phone calls, online searches, and personal connections to determine where Nasreen was living. His wife, Shmuel Rawabde, and son, Nasim, played more direct roles. In this months, the Irsan home became a center of surveillance. Phone records and court documents later revealed hours of calls made to check addresses, verify apartment complexes, and locate Galara's daily patterns. On the night of January 15, 2012, Ali Irsan's deadly plan took its first victim. It was a quiet Sunday evening in Houston. Galara Bagherzadeh, a 30-year-old molecular genetics student and outspoken women's rights activist, was on her way home after spending time with friends. She had just pulled into her neighborhood near the Galleria, an upscale area where her parents lived. As usual, she was talking on the phone with her boyfriend, Mehrdad Moaidi, laughing and chatting during the short drive. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But just as Galara's car approached the gated entrance of her parents' townhome complex, a vehicle pulled up beside her. In the next instant, a gunshot tore through her passenger side window, striking her in the head while she was still mid-sentence. Her boyfriend, still on the line, heard the sudden noise, followed by silence. Moments later, her car rolled forward slowly, mounted the curb, and crashed into a parked vehicle. She died instantly. There was no confrontation, no robbery, no warning, just a clean, precise shot, and then the killer vanished into the darkness. Mehrdad immediately called 911, panic in his voice as he tried to explain what had just happened. When police arrived on the scene, they found Galara slumped in the driver's seat, her phone still on, the call still connected. A single bullet had ended her life, leaving no obvious motive and no immediate suspects. Houston police were stunned. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, and nothing stolen. The scene looked more than a random act of violence. The bullet had entered cleanly through the passenger side window, striking her directly, suggesting the shooter knew where she would be and when. Whoever pulled the trigger had planned this. Detectives interviewed family members, friends, and neighbors. Galara had no known enemies. She was well-liked, deeply involved in the Iranian American community, and admired for her boldness. She had spoken publicly on human rights issues, appeared on satellite television programs, and criticized Iran's government. But no one recalled her receiving any threats. Her activism was bold, yes, but not dangerous, they thought. To her loved ones, the murder made no sense. Her parents were devastated, forced to identify her body at the morgue, a moment no parent should ever have to face. Her boyfriend was in shock. Her friends could hardly believe the news. In a matter of seconds, a bright, outspoken voice had been silenced, and no one could understand why. Investigators initially focused on her public profile, wondering if her activism had made her a target, but there was no evidence linking her death to anything political. There was no known stalker, no signs of domestic trouble. The case grew cold almost immediately. What the police didn't yet know was that this was only the beginning. Behind closed doors, inside the Ersan family's secluded home in rural Montgomery County, a much darker story was unfolding. Ali Ersan was already planning a second murder. His obsession with reclaiming what he called family honor had taken root long ago, and in his twisted view, Galara had played a role in leading his daughter Nesreen away from Islam and toward a life he could not accept. As detectives worked to make sense of Galara's murder, the Ersans were already one step ahead. But Ali Ersan wasn't finished. He believed there was still another person responsible for corrupting his daughter. Someone closer. Someone who had married Nesreen, given her shelter, and stood by her when she left home. His name was Cody Beavers. And Ali had already decided that Cody would be next. Nearly 11 months after the murder of Galara Bagherzadeh, on the morning of November 12, 2012, Ali Mahmoud Awad Ersan struck again. The day began like any other for Cody Beavers and his wife Nesreen Ersan, who were living in a gated apartment complex in northwest Harris County, Texas. Ever since Galara's death, the couple had been on high alert. Cody, in particular, had grown increasingly cautious. He often carried a concealed handgun, regularly checked his surroundings, and even installed additional locks and safety measures inside their home. Friends recalled that Cody had warned others about the danger posed by Nesreen's father. He told them plainly, "If something ever happens to me, it's Ali Ersan." But on this day, all the precautions failed. Ali Ersan managed to enter the gated apartment complex through unknown means. It's believed he may have trailed a resident through the secured entrance. Once inside, Ali approached Cody and Nesreen's unit. It remains unclear whether the door was unlocked, forced open, or if he was let in. There were no signs of forced entry. What is known, however, is chilling. Ali entered the apartment before Cody arrived and waited inside, armed and ready to kill. Cody returned home alone around midday. Nesreen was not expected for a few more hours. As he walked into his home, he was ambushed. Ali shot Cody multiple times in the chest at close range. The shooting was fast, precise, and without struggle, just like Galara. Ali then fled the scene quietly, leaving behind no immediate clues. No valuables were taken, no furniture overturned. It was not a robbery, it was a hit. When Nesreen returned later that afternoon, the horror that greeted her was unbearable. She found Cody lying on the floor, unresponsive and covered in blood. Emergency services were called, but it was too late. Cody was declared dead at the scene. For Nesreen, there was no doubt. The same man who had murdered her best friend Galara was now responsible for killing her husband. The grief was overwhelming, but so was the clarity. She told police everything, not just about Cody's murder, but about her entire past. She revealed the full extent of the abuse she had suffered growing up in her father's house. The years of control. The threats. The time he told her that leaving Islam was punishable by death. She told them how Ali had previously killed her first husband, Amjad Alidam, back in 1999, and claimed it was self-defense. How her father had always promised to kill anyone who helped her escape his grip. She explained that Cody and Galara had done just that. Given her freedom, safety, and love. This time, police took her seriously. Investigators with the Harris County Sheriff's Office, supported by federal agents, began reviewing surveillance footage, phone records, and prior complaints. They pulled Ali Ersan's phone logs, checked his movements, and went back to the 2012 shooting of Galara Bagherzadeh. What they began to uncover was a pattern, one that suggested a carefully coordinated campaign of violence. Evidence showed that the Ersan family had used online tools, GPS, and personal connections to track Cody and Nesreen's movements. They had searched their names on databases, visited their apartment complex, and monitored social media activity. In the weeks after Cody's murder, investigators also re-examined Ali Ersan's financial activity. He had already been under investigation for Social Security and disability fraud, and now that case helped authorities access key documents and internal family communications. With Nesreen's testimony, new digital evidence, and surveillance data, the pieces began to fall into place. The case was no longer just a local homicide. It had become a federal and state-level conspiracy investigation. The narrative became chillingly clear. This was a calculated effort to silence those who had defied or corrupted the Irsan family. For Ali, the acts were not simply revenge. They were, in his mind, necessary corrections to preserve what he saw as familial and religious honor. By 2014, Ali Irsan was formally charged in connection to both murders. It was a rare instance in American criminal justice where prosecutors used the framework of honor killings to describe the motive behind the crime. These were not random acts of violence, they argued. They were the culmination of radical ideology, patriarchal dominance, and calculated planning. In the months following Cody's death, law enforcement worked to secure cooperation from members of the Irsan family. Eventually, key testimonies and plea deals allowed prosecutors to piece together the scope of the conspiracy. Ali Irsan's wife and daughter would both be held accountable in some form. But the weight of the crimes, both in planning and execution, rested squarely on Ali himself. By the time Ali Irsan was brought before a jury, the full scope of his actions had already stunned both investigators and the public. But it wasn't just the brutal nature of the killings that captured national attention. It was the cold, calculated belief system that lay beneath them. His trial would not only determine guilt or innocence. It would also expose a world of control, fear, and radical ideology hidden within the walls of a seemingly unremarkable Texas home. Ali Irsan's path to trial was not straightforward. The case was assigned to District Judge Jan Crocker, and preparations began for what would become one of the most significant honor-based violence trials in recent U.S. history. The trial began in June 2018 in Houston, Texas. The courtroom was filled with a mix of family members, reporters, advocates, and observers. Prosecutors laid out their case clearly. This was not an act of temporary madness or emotional instability. This was premeditated, ideologically motivated, and executed with chilling resolve. They described Ali Irsan as the ringleader of a conspiracy involving multiple members of his household. His actions, they said, were driven by a rigid belief system in which familial honor trumped all else, even life itself. During the trial, the state relied heavily on testimony from Ali's own daughter, Nesreen, whose bravery in taking the stand was acknowledged even by those hardened to courtroom proceedings. Calm but emotional, Nesreen recounted years of abuse at the hands of her father, emotional manipulation, threats, isolation, and physical punishment. She described how her father repeatedly warned her that converting from Islam was a sin punishable by death, and that marrying a Christian man like Cody Beavers was a betrayal he would never forgive. She also revealed that her father openly blamed Galara Bagherzadeh for influencing her decision to leave Islam and marry Cody. She recalled how Ali would obsessively talk about Galara and how he claimed she had brainwashed his daughter. The courtroom listened intently as Nesreen revealed how fearful she had become of her own family. She had obtained a restraining order, fled her father's house, and even kept her location a secret from most people. But none of it had been enough. The prosecution methodically laid out the timeline of the crimes. Surveillance footage, phone records, and forensic evidence were used to connect Ali Irsan to both murders. They argued that Ali orchestrated the killing of Galara by enlisting the help of his then 21-year-old son, Nasim Irsan, who had ambushed Galara outside her parents' home while she was still on the phone with her boyfriend. They then demonstrated how Ali stalked Nesreen and Cody for months, eventually breaking into their apartment and killing Cody execution style while Nesreen was away. To solidify the case, the prosecution presented a chilling revelation from Ali's past. The suspicious death of Amjad Alidam, his daughter's previous husband in 1999. Though never convicted in that case, Ali had claimed self-defense at the time. Prosecutors now cited this as part of a pattern. Men who defied Ali's authority or took his daughters away ended up dead. They described him as a man who used religion and power to instill fear, who manipulated the concept of honor to justify murder. The defense, meanwhile, attempted to portray Ali as a devout father, misunderstood and perhaps misguided, but not a cold-blooded killer. They questioned the credibility of Nasreen's testimony and suggested that other individuals may have had motives to harm Gilara. But their arguments found little traction. The state's case was bolstered by overwhelming physical evidence, as well as cooperation from other members of the Irsan household, including his wife Shmu al-Rawabdeh, who entered into a plea deal. Perhaps most telling was the jury's reaction. After weeks of testimony and hours of closing arguments, the jury needed only 35 minutes to return a verdict. Ali Irsan was found guilty of capital murder on all counts. The speed of the decision reflected the gravity and clarity of the evidence, but the trial didn't end with the conviction. The sentencing phase that followed was equally critical. Texas law requires a separate proceeding to determine whether a person found guilty of capital murder should be sentenced to life imprisonment or death. Here, the state's focus shifted from proving guilt to establishing the future danger posed by Ali and the moral weight of his crimes. During sentencing, the prosecution presented further evidence of Ali's violent and manipulative tendencies. They brought forward jailhouse phone recordings in which he continued to express no remorse and even mocked the victims' families. His lack of empathy, combined with his prior history, painted a picture of a man unlikely to ever change. Witnesses testified to the psychological scars left on his surviving children, some of whom had fled the home in fear, others who had participated in the crimes out of loyalty or fear. The defense sought to humanize Ali, presenting his advanced age and deteriorating health as reasons to spare his life. The jurors were unconvinced. On August 14, 2018, after years of investigation, arrest, and legal maneuvering, Ali Malwood Awad Irsan was sentenced to death by lethal injection by a Texas jury. The verdict was a culmination of tireless work by law enforcement, prosecutors, and the families of the victims, particularly the mother of Gilara, whose grief had become a quiet force of advocacy. The jury's decision reflected not only the calculated brutality of Ali's crimes, but also the premeditated nature with which he had attempted to extinguish lives that represented independence, freedom, and defiance of oppressive values. The courtroom had heard testimonies about Ali's long history of control and intimidation. Prosecutors detailed how he surveilled his daughter Nasreen, controlled her movements, and openly expressed hatred for her lifestyle choices. Witnesses described a household dominated by fear, where Ali's word was law, and dissent was punished swiftly and often violently. His disdain for Cody Beavers, Nasreen's husband, and Gilara Bagherzadeh, her closest confidant, stemmed from a belief that they had led his daughter away from the conservative Islamic path he demanded she follow. But the justice system's reach extended beyond Ali Irsan. His wife, Shmu al-Rawabdeh, who had initially cooperated with authorities in exchange for leniency, was later sentenced to 90 months in federal prison for conspiracy and fraud-related charges. In August 2019, Nassim Irsan, already in correctional custody for more than 4 years, reached a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to murder instead of capital murder and received a 40-year sentence, with time off for time already served. He may apply for parole around 2039. The national reaction to the case was as varied as it was intense. Civil rights organizations and women's advocacy groups cited the case as a grim example of honor-based violence playing out in a modern Western setting. It reignited critical debates about how immigrant communities wrestle with integrating traditional values within the framework of American civil liberties, and how some patriarchal ideologies, when left unchecked, can fester into lethal outcomes. In interviews, prosecutors were clear. This was not a case about religion. It was about control. Ali had used the pretext of faith to justify murder, but at its core, This was a story of a man whose grip on his family was slipping, and whose response was to eliminate those he blamed for that unraveling. His actions betrayed not only the values he claimed to protect, but the very essence of parenthood and humanity. If this story moved you, please share it. Help raise awareness about honor-based violence and the hidden dangers many face, even here in the places we think are safe. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more real stories that matter, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Justice must be seen, and stories like this must be heard.